Welcome back to Questing Beast. I am Ben. Today we're taking a look at Mythic Bastionland. This is the preview PDF for Chris McDowell's upcoming role-playing game that is a kind of spiritual successor to Electric Bastionland, which was a successor to Into the Odd. They all use basically the same system, but with some tweaks for their particular settings. And Mythic Bastionland is interesting because its setting is much more hex crawly, and it has this mythic Arthurian feel to it. This is a preview for the upcoming Kickstarter. In fact, if you're watching this, the Kickstarter should be live right now. Link is in the description below. This is not a paid preview at all. I'm just doing this because I really love Chris McDowell's work, and I really wanted to succeed. I want to show you what is so cool about Mythic Bastionland. So let's dig right into it here. This is just the preview rules for 3rd of November, 2023. These could change. There's going to be art that's missing. There's going to be editing that's going to need to be done and all that sort of thing. You know the deal for Kickstarter previews. There's a little poem at the beginning here to set the tone. On cold Miston hills, beast witsome and fell. In holdings and havens the vassals adwell. Seers know the all, the start and the end. Myths hushed aloud, to which truth must abend. Aside vagabonds on snakealine trails, knights render these stories are wrenched from their veils. For the oath, for the glory, through sorrow and ache, the city, the quest, to which no knight can make. This is a game about being knights. You're kind of like a Knight of the Round Table sort of guy. You have a very unique theme, and you are traveling across a large hex crawl, exploring the land, visiting villages, and completing or resolving myths, which are scattered around and kind of take up a hex. You find a hex, you resolve the myth there, and there's lots of examples of these in the book, and that kind of allows you to level up and gain more stature in the world at large, and you gain more responsibilities. The way you level up in this system, if you want to call it leveling up, is through gaining glory, and you get glory through resolving these myths is the main way that you get that. And as you can see here in this rank section, you gain these ranks as you gain more glory, and those don't give you more stats. What they do is they give you more stature in the world. For example, by the time you're a knight tenant, you're worthy of ruling a holding. By the time you're a knight dominant, you could be worthy of ruling a seat of power. You gain more influence over the world. Just like in Electric Bastionland and Into the Odd, you have 3 stats. In this case, it is Vigor, Clarity, and Spirit. Vigor is a little bit like Strength and Constitution. Clarity seems to be kind of like Dexterity and Intelligence. And Spirit being like Wisdom and Charisma all rolled into one. Just like before, it's on a 3 to 18-ish scale, and it's usually around 10, and you're trying to roll under it to pass saves. You also have a guard stat, which is like your hit points. It goes down real quick, but it can recover very quickly. And there are these 3 oaths that focus your attention on what you're going to be doing as a player. Those are seeking the myths, honoring the seers, and protecting the realm. So if you're ever in doubt as to what we should do next in this campaign, just pick one of those and you'll have something to do. This continues the rules from the previous versions of Into the Odd, where there is no attack rolls, there was only damage rolls. So when you attack someone, you just roll your damage die. That's how much damage you do to their hit points, or in this case, it's called your guard. And if it goes through your guard, then it's going to start damaging your ability scores or your virtues directly. However, unlike some of the previous versions of this game, this does have a little bit more tactical depth in terms of things that you can do during combat. There are feats, these special abilities that you can do in order to gain a little bit more control over the situation. You are, I think, a little bit more powerful than you would be in previous versions of the game because you are knights. It's easier for you to knock away blows or to deal extra damage, though there is a cost to that, or there are a limited number of times that you can do that. One of the main ways that you're going to become tougher in the game is by gaining scars. So this is a rule we've seen before, where if your hit points or your guard goes down to exactly 0, you gain a scar, and it could have beneficial effects, but it could be bad as well. For example, if your scar is number 2, disfigurement, you gain a permanent mark. For example, a mark on your torso or your nose or your jaw. But it says if your max guard is 2 or less, increase it by d6. So this could be a way that you become a bit tougher by taking these scars and having these experiences. There's 3 main feats that characters can perform in combat, and these are Smite, Focus, and Deny. Each of these is tied to one of your 3 virtues. So for example, if you use Smite, then in a melee attack, you can gain a plus D12 or blast to the attack, which would hurt everyone around there, like a big sweeping attack. So this is a great way to deal lots of extra damage. Focus allows you to perform a gambit, like a maneuver where you can do something creative. And Deny allows you to actually knock away or block entirely an attack roll against you or an ally. However, whenever you do one of these feats, you do have to pass a save or you become fatigued and you can't do any more feats until later. However, if you keep passing on these saves, you can just keep using them over and over. This makes you significantly more powerful than a standard Into the Odd character. The way that gambits work is typically if you do an attack roll and your dice or your damage roll is 4 or higher, you can discard that in order to do one of these gambits down below, which could be bolster your attack, move, you could repel, you could stop a foe from moving next turn, impair their weapon attack, and so forth. Although they often get a save in order to resist that. However, if the damage die that you rolled was 8 or more, you can do a strong gambit, which often stops them from making one of these saves. It's just a more powerful effect. It's a very simple and easy system to use. And it's especially useful when you have multiple characters attacking one character, because in that situation, all of the characters roll their damage dice and you just pick the highest one to be the damage. However, you can still spend some of those other dice in order to perform gambits. There are rules for running war bands and actually doing small-scale warfare in this kind of low medieval setting, which is really important because that's what a knight should be doing, I think. It basically just abstracts things a bit so the entire company or group is like one character that is just a lot tougher and can't really be damaged by individual characters. So it just takes things up to a higher level. The section on arms and goods is interesting in that gold and coin does exist, but typically most bartering is done just by bartering, by trade. So when you want to buy expensive items, you need to think about what does this character want, and you have to trade them for something or perhaps do a service for them. One thing I like is that swords are actually rare weapons, so you're not going to find those lying around. Typically, you'll be holding things like slings, javelins, short bows, a dagger or a spear, things like that. If you want to get a sword, you probably have to go to a major center of civilization and find a master blacksmith to make one for you. There is armor ratings, and you can wear up to 4 pieces of armor, and those are shields, coats of mail, helms, and plate armor. You can stack all 4 of those together, kind of like in Knave, so you can get up to 4 points of armor, and armor is straight up just damage reduction. There is no real disadvantage, it seems like, to wearing a whole lot of armor, so you want to wear as much as you can. This game is very much about hex crawling, and what I love about it is it gives you very straightforward and concrete advice on how to build that realm. You want like a 12 by 12 grid of hexes. It tells you about how many different types of settlements you want, how many myths you want, how to spread them out, so that by the time you follow all of these instructions, you have a pretty well fleshed out and rich setting with lots of points of interest and lots of examples in the book that you can use that your players can dive right into. It even has a little system for sites. So if you zoom into one particular hex and there's like a mini dungeon there to explore, it has a procedure that you can walk through. You can see this picture up here in the corner where you use basically a hexagon and you take out one of these 7 spots in the hexagon and you connect the rest of them together and you set them up with different points. These could be features, there could be danger, there could be treasures. You have some of the routes between them are open, some of them are hidden, some of them are closed. And it creates these little mini dungeons, these little mini adventures for players to explore very quickly, and they have a nice amount of interactivity and interconnectivity. It's a really great procedure. It's great for making little adventure sites. You could use this for anything. And this hex crawl rules as well. You could easily use this to build adventure zones or hex crawling lands for any role-playing game that you were playing, because this is pretty system neutral. As usual, Chris has some of the best refereeing advice in role-playing games. It's very succinct, as usual with Chris. It's usually in groups of 3 little things to remember, and it just gives you all that you need to get started, and it gives you these very clear guidelines that you can go back to if you feel like the session isn't going all that well. And you can just read through this refereeing section and you very clearly get a sense of, oh, that's the thing that I could have fixed, or that's a way I could have increased the impact. So it's things like action procedure. Whenever players are trying to do something, think intent. What are you trying to do? Leverage. What makes this possible? Cost. Would it use a resource, cause a virtue loss, or have a negative side effect? Risk. What's at risk? No risk, no roll. Otherwise, make a save or a luck roll. And then what is the impact of that thing? By going through this, you're not going to be wasting your time with needless rolls, and all the rolls that you do are going to feel really good and feel like they're actually changing the game and honoring the player's choices. The way that time works in this game is really interesting and reminds me a bit of games like Pendragon, where this is assumed to take place over long periods of time. So a day has 3 phases, morning, afternoon, and night. A year has 3 seasons, spring, harvest, and winter. And there are festivals tied to each of these things, along with aesthetic stuff that goes along with them. And a life has 3 ages, young, mature, and old. So in between sessions, you can decide whether the next session is going to pick up right afterwards, or perhaps in the next season, or even in the next age of your life. So as you pull together an entire campaign, long periods of time can go by and you can see large changes happen to the setting, and you can see the impact of your choices over these grand expanses of time. And I like that that's built into the game, and it's a way to really get a sense of scale and get a sense of age and time passing, and a sense of that kind of mournful sense of things falling apart. And maybe grand things rise due to your actions, but nothing can last forever, which feels very Arthurian and very in keeping with this mythic feel that I think Chris is going for. There, of course, is rules for travel across the hex crawl, how fast that you can go, how people are going to take you in, give you hospitality, how to camp, the problems with winter. Like if you're traveling around in winter, you're going to just be losing vigor all the time, because just don't travel in winter. That's a bad idea. That's very in keeping with the kind of the medieval practice of not going on campaign during the winter time. There are omens that can creep up as you travel around, because each of the myths, which is tied to a particular hex, has omens attached to it that are a sign that it is nearby that you can use to kind of lure the players in that direction. So you can come across these omens. There's other traveling tables. There's rules for exploration over here, gathering folklore from nearby vassals, from knights and vagabonds. One of the most important types of characters in the game are seers. These are these almost inhuman characters, these mythic, powerful beings that have a deep knowledge of the world and of what's actually going on with the myths. It's a great way to dispense lots of information directly to the players, which is always good, because if players are going to be seeking out these myths, part of that should be finding information about them. So part of that mission can be seeking out a seer and gaining the information on how to begin tackling, at least partially, these strange events scattered throughout the land. Some good rules here on running your dominion and your authority if you get to that point in the game where you're actually running a stronghold, and the council that you'll have to hire, and especially all the crises that you're going to have to deal with, because that's part of ruling. Is as time goes by, crises will keep popping up. There's a random table for these over here. For example, there could be chaos, lawlessness in the land, the resolution being enforce a sense of justice, or misery, the vassals question why they toil. The resolution could be raise the spirits of the people. And if you don't pay attention to these will pile up, and things will get worse and worse, and you could be unseated from your authority. The book comes with a couple of pages of spark tables, which is really great. I love these types of random tables to just give you ideas of things to make while you are prepping: nature, civilization, people, and combat. And each of these is 9 tables and each table is 2 D12 lists. And you roll on both of those lists together and you combine them to make something. So we call them spark tables. For example, people. You could have appearance. You combine a physique and a dress. So their physique is warm and their dress is tattered. Perhaps their personality, it has 2 things: demeanor and interest. So they're intellectual and they're interested in crafts. Just by pulling these things together, you can quickly come up with interesting ideas. And there's ones for combat, for weapons, maneuvers, deployment strategy, all of this stuff. And now we come to what I think is the real meat of the book, which is the knights and the myths. So there are 72 knights and 72 myths in this book. The knights, of course, are all character classes, but they could easily be turned into NPCs that your characters could run into as well. There's plenty of other knights errant running around the realm, either doing good or causing problems. And the myths are all of the strange problems that you're going to be resolving throughout the hex crawl. There's 72 of each, and each of the 2-page spreads look like this. You always have a knight on one side and a myth on the other. They're not necessarily connected to each other, although they could be if you wanted to. So let's look at an example of a class. So the True Knight. Each of the knights has a kind of title, like the True Knight, the Snare Knight, the Tourney Knight, the Bloody Knight, stuff like that. The True Knight says, a pact to uphold truth, the false slung broken upon their lies. Properties. You always start off with some equipment, just like in any Into the Odd game. You get a polished mace, which is D8 and hefty. You get mail, armor 1, plate, armor 1, and helm, armor 1. Start off with 3 armor. That's pretty good. You get a kite shield, armor 1, 4 armor. Fantastic. Marked with a symbol of the truth. See below. You get a petulant steed. I love how your horses are always described, with stats for your horse too, because it could become in danger if someone attacked it. You have a special ability, Punitive Stroke. Make a melee attack against a known liar and get plus D10 to the attack, ignoring armor. So you want to seek out liars, or maybe get someone to lie so you can hit them harder. You have a passion, honesty. Restore your spirit, because your stats can be decreased by different effects. When you tell the truth where a lie might be more beneficial. You have a symbol of truth. For example, there's a trigger to it, like lying to you about their identity creates a golden glow, or something turns cold, or there's a gentle hum. So you always have these things that are thematically attached to your knight. And each of these knights even has the seer that knighted them at the bottom. So this is a great way to grab random seers to plop down in your hex crawl. This one is the Rotted Seer. Their withered touch is only contagious if they will it. They see the way to live on through any amount of physical decay, and they want to become more rotten, filthy, and diseased. One really cool thing is that all of the 2-page spreads throughout this section have lots of little bits and pieces of flavor and just characters and items and places that are tied to things on the pages, but they've been pulled out and put down at the bottom so that if you're ever stuck on something, you can just flip to a random page and grab stuff from the bottom as inspiration. So let's say you're exploring a hex crawl and you need a place. You got a dwelling, the Traveler's Inn, or a sanctum, the Mirrored Grotto, or a hazard, some forgotten traps, or a theme, names, characteristic, cold eyes, right? So you always have stuff that you can draw from very quickly by just kind of pulling it out of these nights and these myths. Let's take a look at a myth as well. This one is called the Plague. And down here, there's always omens. So there's always 6 omens, things that give indications or information about that myth and might lead you in the right direction. So you always start at the top and you work your way down. So if you start coming across evidence of the plague, you might find an old coot proclaims their dreams where foul air was choking people in their sleep, pleads for help spreading the word. And the next one might be moaning in the mist, an ivy-cloaked shack home to a dying old couple, their daughter left to search for treatment. And then by the end, you often have a much more clear example of that this is the plague. You've probably found the actual hex by this point. An infected village, the root of the plague. All are visibly infected. 2 purging knights charging to cleanse with flame. And it has a cast over here, the Angry Infected. These are all characters and people from the omens. We also have a little random table to make the malady different every time. So the fatal symptom could be bleeding and the transmission could be skin contact. Now, how do you actually resolve this myth? It doesn't tell you. The way it spells it out is when a myth is resolved, it's when all of the players, including the GM, agree that it's been resolved. That could be for good or for ill, but as long as it's come to a conclusion, then it's been resolved and you gain a glory. In this case, it could be perhaps stopping the purging knights who are trying to cleanse the area with flame and kill all the people in their huts. You could be trying to help them and get rid of the plague that way. Perhaps you find some other cure for it. That's really going to be up to you. Each of these knights and these myths is just packed with information and flavor and stuff for you to use. So you got the Snare Knight, sort of like a hunter. You have the Wall as a myth, the Tourney Knight, if you want to be really good at competing in tournaments and winning glory through competition, the Shadow, this creeping hand going over the land, the Bloody Knight, the River, the Moss Knight, the Wyvern. Each of these has so much there that just brings to life the world just through the illustrations, which are absolutely gorgeous, and through all of this flavor text and all this implied world building, which the players are kind of fill in as they play through some of these myths and start trying to piece together what's actually going on here. As I mentioned before, there are 72 of each of these, and the ones near the end, all the art is not completely finished yet. That's partially what the Kickstarter is for. The Rat Knight, the Rock, and so on. The Odpocrypha at the back. What is really fantastic about this is it's not really the Game Master's Guide. What it is an example of play, an extended example of play with commentary on that example of play by Chris. It is a really great way to do this. I think I've talked before about how I wanted more games to do stuff like this, so it's awesome that it's actually happening. So for example, start and scope. How do you start and set up a campaign? It has the ref and 2 players talking about it, and then Chris has commentary on what did the Game Master do right? What did he like about that? What are some things that could be improved? So you really get inside the creator of the game's head, and you get a real sense of how he would run the game. What I really love is that there is a whole section here on teaching the rules, and I really like Chris's approach. It's pretty similar to how I do it, where it's all about getting your characters made as quickly as possible and then throwing them into the game. The rules in all of the Into the Odd systems are very straightforward, so there's not a ton of stuff to learn, but still you don't want them reading pages of text before you start the game. You can introduce all that stuff as you go. Pages like this are fantastic for new game masters. Getting rules wrong. People often panic about that. What do you do when that happens? What happens when you get stuck and the players are just sort of wandering around and you don't know where to go next? Because this is a very player-driven game. This is not the sort of game where you're creating a plot and characters are going through it. It's a hex crawl. Players can go wherever they want. So how do you make sure that the game is engaging when the players lose their motivation? There are lots of pages on things like danger and combat, how to run gambits and unusual attacks. He anticipates that players are going to think of out-of-the-box solutions to enemies that they fight. They're going to come up with tactics that aren't in the rules. How do you handle that stuff? Because that's a core part of what makes these types of games fun. There's even a section on how to deal with character death, which is something that a lot of new game masters especially shy away from, but it's part of the game. Players are going to live or die by their choices, and those need to be honored. This whole system of having the in-play example with the commentary is probably the best example I've seen of how to explain how to play one of these games, because everything isn't abstracted. It's very concrete. You see how the advice applies to the game, in an actual example of play in the real world, rather than just being in this very pie in the sky theoretical example of play, which is often very hard to figure out, how would that work when I'm actually playing the game. Well, that's it for the preview of Mythic Bastionland. The Kickstarter is, as I mentioned, live right now. Link in the description below. Go check that out if this looks cool to you. I love the Into the Odd games, and I love the Electric Bastionland games, and I am sure I'm going to love Mythic Bastionland when I see the final version of it as well. Gorgeous art, amazing presentation, rules that are incredibly tight, and the world is just packed with awesome Arthurian flavor, if that's the kind of world that you're into. Before we go, a shout out to all of my patrons over on Patreon. Thank you so much for supporting the channel and helping to keep Questing Beast alive. I couldn't do this stuff without you. You guys rock. See you guys next time. Thanks for watching.